When I read a nonfiction book about a historical event, I expect more or less just a recitation of the facts, maybe spun in a certain way to give it some narrative structure. But I've never read a book so blatantly biased and skewed before. Tyrannosaurus Sue by Steve Pfiffer is about the discovery and the subsequent ordeal of ownership about a set of T-Rex fossils found in South Dakota known as Sue, named after my mother. No, named after the woman who discovered the bones, obviously. Who is my mother? Sue is one of the largest and most complete set of T-Rex bones and was eventually sold at auction for just over $8 million, worth $13 million now. The discovery itself was rather simple, but it seemed just about everyone wanted to pitch in and claim their own stake as to why they owned Sue. You see, Sue was found on a private ranch in a Native American reservation and was dug up with permission by a nearby science institute. The landowner, Maurice Williams, claimed that, yes, he gave the institute permission to dig, but it was only so they could find it, clean it, and then return Sue to him so that the fossil could then be sold. The institute, led by Peter Larson, claimed that they had paid Williams $5,000 and that because of that transaction, they owned the fossil, point blank period. The Reservation Council claimed that they owned the fossils because it was found on reservation land. Then, the U.S. government got involved and said that because they owned the land in trust to Williams, that Williams had no right to even sell the fossil without any, necessary permits or anything. So, several court cases, appeals, raids, pages upon pages of legal jargon later, Sue the fossil is given back to Maurice Williams, and an auction is held where Sue is eventually bought by a museum in Chicago. They had funding mostly from McDonald's and Disney, which is why back in the 90s McDonald's had a huge, dinosaurs thing, and why there's a giant T-Rex skeleton in the middle of the Dino Land Park in Disney World. Opinions, let's do this. Dinosaurs friggin' rock. And if I didn't hate math and science and dirt, I would probably be a paleontologist. That's so cool. But alas, unfortunately, according to this book, any attempt that I made to discover any fossils and I would be crushed by the big bad government. The author really goes out of his way to make sure that you are always on the Institute's side. From the very get-go, when the first raid happens and the U.S. government seizes the fossil in order to claim it as evidence for an upcoming trial, he describes it as if it's like a baby being ripped out of a mother's arms. One of the main charges that was brought up against Peter Larson and the people in his employment was that they were digging on public lands and in national parks, which is illegal. And both the author and Larson's lawyer were like, okay, but what even is public land? What even is land? Are fossils land or are they separate? It was found that yes, fossils are part of the land. Also, maps are really hard to read. Literally, some of the maps can be difficult to read. Page 174, chapter, They're Not Crimes. But honestly, I kind of side with the government in this case. He had been digging for decades at this point. He can't feign ignorance on every single charge that they brought up against him. So Larson did eventually have to pay a huge fine and had to serve 2 years in a federal prison, which is a severely light sentence considering how many cases they put up against him, over 100, and all the evidence that they had pointing towards him being guilty. One of the main points that I think that he probably got off a little easy is that they held a trial in the town where his institute was and where years of publicity had been done in oh, the government is so bad, they stole our dinosaur. And the author frames this as oh, the people of the town, they're not biased in any way. They're able to distinguish between what's true and what's right. Like, come on. Then there's this whole other subplot about like Larson being a commercial seller. Like, does he have the right to collect these fossils and then sell them off to the highest bidder? And the author's like, yeah, no, he has a right. That's, capitalism. And honestly, I have to side with the author's antagonists for this point. Like, pieces of historically significant, like, anthropological finds should be put in museums or places of education to be studied and to be put into the public knowledge. It shouldn't be sold overseas or to, like, someone's private collection. Like, who does that help? Did I like it? There's a lot of legal jargon, and like I said, obviously I'm not super on the same side as the author, so it made it a little hard to read. Would I read this again? Probably not. I can read about the T-Rex fossils. Like, literally after I finished the book, I was like, okay, I want some unbiased sources now. And I like looked at the Wikipedia, I read some other articles, I watched a video about it, and I'm like, okay, yeah, no, the Larsons were kind of in the wrong about this. My next book was going to be this one, A Crack in the Edge of the World, which claims to be about the disaster in 1906 in San Francisco, where there was a huge earthquake and then a fire and a flood and all this kind of crap. In a 400-page book, you don't need the first 100 pages to just be about the science of it, Give me some peril. Give me some personal testimonies of terror. Like, where I left off, they were talking about some islands that were growing off the shore of Iceland. I'm like, this isn't... what? This isn't relevant! Trained at Oxford as a geologist. Okay, yeah, no, it's a freaking geologist professor's book. Anyway, so the next book that I'm going to be reading, the next 3 at least, are going to be the books from the Dresden Files series by Jim Butcher. My husband really likes it, and I promised him I would read them. So, yeah. Okay, bye. Or like places of educainment. What's the word? Edutainment. Entertain. Education.